on since 11:03. Okay, we're live. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Personnel Board meeting for Wednesday, December 15th, 2021. I'm going to call the meeting to order now at 12:01 to start us off. And then I'm going to read this little state blurb for everyone. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, an act relative to extend certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, signed into law on June 16th, 2021. This meeting will be conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance by members of the public will be permitted. You may watch this meeting or participate in the meeting remotely with the meeting link at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. And good afternoon again, everyone. Before we start the meeting off, I would like to take an opportunity to give my thanks to Betsy Rosenbloom for her unwavering years of service on this board. Betsy's dedication and commitment to this board and our town employees was admirable. I am grateful for the literally thousands of hours that she worked tirelessly on their behalf. We have some mighty big shoes to fill. And Betsy, we are so grateful for everything you've done for us, and we wish you all the best. You will be missed. Okay, first thing on the agenda is board reorganization. And I'm going to make a nomination, if that's okay. I'm nominating Barry Rubenstein as chair. Do I have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion?
I have a question. Is this a promotion or demotion for being +1?
I think it's a lateral move. Does anybody have any discussion or comments or anything? Okay, motion has been seconded. This has to be a roll call vote as we are on Zoom. Dave Nixon?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Dorianne Jasinski, aye. Barry?
I'll abstain.
Okay, motion is approved. Barry, you are the new chair, and I am handing over the agenda to you, sir. This is your meeting.
Thank you. I think
That's a tough job.
I would much rather Betsy still be here, and I think we all feel that way, and share heartily in your comments about her. She'll definitely be missed. Moving along, minutes were shared before the meeting. Anyone have any questions, comments, changes to the minutes?
Just a thank you to Betsy for doing them. I wasn't actually expecting to have the minutes, so only that we probably have to figure out a process moving forward.
Right, and we've had some preliminary discussions about that. I think Vanessa has volunteered to step in, at least on a short-term basis, to help out, but we are working on, with Dorian's able assistance, finding a more permanent solution to that. So we'll deem the minutes approved. Next item is the expenditure ledger. I don't think there are any changes from last month. Vanessa?
Barry, but never mind. I'm sorry. I was thinking about taking a roll call vote, but following Betsy's format of the chair approving the minutes.
Yeah, we just.
Sorry, I was jumping ahead.
Okay. Anything on the expenditure ledger?
No.
Seeing nothing, we will move on to the Assistant Town Administrator's report. Ms. Hale.
Thank you very much. As noted in your packet, I just wanted to let the board know about two recent appointments. One is Colleen Stansfield, our new full-time admin to the planning board and the town planner. Colleen, when I wrote the memo, she was due to start on December 27th. She is actually going to start early next week. She was able to reshuffle some things in her schedule, so we are very grateful that she's able to start before the holiday and give some much needed help to Karina and her department. Sarah Hawker, who was in the position for quite some time, as you know, has moved on to another community. She has been wonderful, though, about helping the department in the interim in a remote capacity. So we certainly want to give our thanks to Sarah. She will start winding down those hours a great deal now. and to transition out as Colleen transitions in. And in the police department, we have appointed a new part-time communications officer to bring some of our dispatch hours up to full staffing.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. And then the next item, there's been a lengthy to-do list for Vanessa to be working on, and we're making some progress here with, we now have, excuse me, an FMLA policy. Why don't you?
Sure, thank you. So as noted, we have been talking a lot about the very outdated FMLA policy that has been on the books. I think it was one of the first things I worked on in my very early years here under Janice Conlon. So when we did go and recruit a new labor attorney, I wanted to speak with Attorney Fedoroff about any template version her firm was using. So this is what she has provided to us. Mark and I have gone through it and made it a little bit more Southborough friendly with the appropriate terminology here. So this is what we are presenting to the board for your review as updated with our new labor attorney.
Any questions?
I don't have any. I read through it, but I'm not a family leave attorney or.
This has been reviewed by new Labor Council,
Right,
correct?
it looks good.
Yes, it has.
Okay.
Okay, then I'm good.
Yeah, I would certainly defer to her. I think there's one typo, I think, on Bates number 14
Okay,
under child. There, in the second line, there's a period and then it starts and I think it should all be the same sentence.
okay, got it. I'll correct that before we distribute it to any employees. Thank you.
Okay, I didn't have anything else. Looks good to me. Thank you for doing that and sharing that with us. Next, you have a sample document to be used in the hiring process.
Yes. So earlier this year, of course, we spent a lot of time talking about developing a template appointment letter that we would use for all employees. I wanted to also share that with Attorney Fedoroff since she had come on board just recently as our new labor attorney. So she did provide some very minor tweaks to the template appointment letter. I just wanted to make sure the board saw the new version of this. So that is what is also included in your packet.
Right.
Those dates should be blank, right? There shouldn't be dates. If this is the template, there shouldn't be any dates on this. So those should.
Yeah, I didn't take out the actual dates. I just took out the name of the personal information, but in general, yes, it would be fillable. That piece would be fillable for every new employee.
All right, thanks, Vanessa.
And this letter would only be used for below midpoint hires. So
correct. And there are some things that are tweaked a little bit, of course, with everyone's a little bit different. In this case, we were talking about a 3-week vacation per year for the most recent appointment. It depends on who's the appointing authority and so forth, but this is all the general language that would apply in the majority of cases.
Any other questions?
Do we have to vote on these or are these just?
No, I just
Updated
wanted to make sure
policy.
the board was aware of the updates to the letter in case you did have any questions.
Okay, thanks, Vanessa.
Can I add one more comment, Chair Rubenstein?
Sure.
I also wanted to let the board know that Mark and I are reviewing the hiring policy with Attorney Fedoroff. That's something we're still working on. It wasn't quite ready for today's meeting packet, but it will be for your January meeting. We wanted, that also is a policy that is extremely, extremely outdated, still referred to, advertising in the Boston Globe or the Worcester Telegram and Gazette, in print, that is. So that also required quite a few updates. So we're working on that for your January meeting.
Thank you. Just see. All right. So I think we're moving on to old business. At the last meeting, the board approved the bylaw change to be brought before town meeting next year. But we were still tinkering with the policy. We added at Mr. Malinowski's suggestion, the fire department positions not covered by the collective bargaining agreement. Any other discussion about the draft policy on salary increases? And there are two attachments to that. There were some minor modifications to attachment 1, I think, to add the manager's position. On attachment 2, and I think I made this provision. So instead of putting the employee's name, because these are going to be increases for groups of employees, not for individual employees. So like election wardens or whatever the case may be. So I thought it should just either say position or employee position, rather than there's no need for employee name because it doesn't apply to a particular employee.
Barry, I think we learned that there are, I'll have to open the personnel plan here, but I thought Betsy had mentioned in the last meeting that there is a range on some of these positions that we've called out as being exempt. There are different rates for some of them. So if that's the case, I don't know if we can do what you just mentioned, but I need to open and validate that comment first. So Schedule C has multiple ranges. There's multiple ranges within Schedule D for position type, so I think we'd be okay there. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, or if anyone remembers that discussion.
Yeah. Well, hold on. Just pulling up my. But I think the point was that if we're not going to require evaluations for these increases, how would we assess a manager coming forward and saying, I want to give this election worker an increase, but not all election workers, if we don't have any evaluation to go on?
I guess it's a minor point, but I think we still need the person's name. We can't do it by position unless I'm misreading Schedule C. So like my understanding is an election worker could have different rates within grade 1. Is that correct or no?
I think in reality they don't, but maybe someone else.
Election workers, all the workers, the poll workers themselves have one rate, the wardens have a second rate. At least that's what it was.
So if I look at the top, if I look at the rates for part-time position under grade 1 as an example, it has a minimum of 1144 and a max of 1456 in the current SAP. So I guess my question is, like, does the town clerk have discretion for that position we're talking about right now when he makes the appointment of a rate? Like, does someone that has more experience gradually move towards the max? I'm just trying to, I don't maybe it's not done in practice, but the way I read the SAP is that there's a range here for each of these positions that we've exempted. So my suggestion is just to keep the name in there and have one done for each name of each of these positions, as opposed to doing it by position title, given that there may be a different rate.
If I can chime in for a moment, he does, of course, have that discretion as the department head. Brian and I could take a look, in Harper's and get back to you if you like. I think would be very unlikely that he would have multiple people at different rates. Of course, if someone, came on board and had done this in another community, maybe he would start that person at something above the minimum. He has that ability, but I think it's unlikely. I know we haven't looked into those, the pay rates of all the current people in that classification, Mr. Malinowski, but we can certainly check that in Harper's.
I guess practice is different than what writing says they have the ability to do. Because like then when I go to recreational seasonal, the rec commission has the ability to set different rates, at least based on the chart that's down below. Whether they do that or not is totally separate. So I don't want to get hung up on this, but that would just be my rationale to keep the name of the person in. And if they have to fill it out 10 or 20 times, it's a lot better than filling out 10 or 20 full evaluations.
Yeah, again, but I keep coming back to if a manager came to us and said, I want to pay this if town clerk came and said, I want to pay this election worker, whatever, $14.56 an hour, and I'm paying everyone else $13. How are we to assess that? Because we don't have an evaluation. I mean, for me, and I think this is what you said, Jason, I'm not disagreeing, but it's two different things. So all election workers can be paid anywhere from $11.44 to $14.56. It's a different question of whether they're all paid the same. My understanding is for all of these groups that we have identified, A through E in the policy, within each of those groups, all of the people are paid the same.
And I would think we want to update the SAP to just be that rate every year, as opposed to having this min and max.
But then you have to change the SAP every year if they're going to get an increase, whereas you don't have to do that now.
And I guess, and I'm actually suggesting we should evaluate this every year, just like we adjust the salary tables up above, because I used the fire department as the key example last year. A chief for 15 years didn't adjust those pay rates until Chief Achilles came forward and proposed an adjustment to that salary schedule. So maybe we don't change them every year, but they should just be looked at every year, and it should be part of the proposal to town meeting. Hey, we're keeping it the same, and this is why, or we're adjusting it, and it's at the recommendation of RecCom, town clerk, etc. I don't know. That's just my 2 cents. Is I know it's somewhat intertwined with this evaluation process. I'm less concerned on the nomenclature you use on the evaluation of just pointing that out, but I would suggest that we actually look at it every year and streamline it, would be my thought.
Okay, and I think we do look at at least since I've been on the board, we do look at the salary schedules, although admittedly on the fire department, we had, I think, historically deferred to the chief on that, and that's not something we had actively gone after until the chief came forward last year, and we made the changes to Schedule D. But and I don't think this is a major issue. For Ryan, if he, I don't know how many pages he has, but if he has to fill out a separate one for each one, it's just, I think our thought was in exempting these groups and saying we don't need an evaluation was that we don't need to be in the business of looking at individual employees in those jobs because they're all paid the same and there's no evaluation done on them.
I was just thinking of a happy medium. How about you keep it exactly as it is, but we ask the department head to actually send a listing or attach a listing of the employees that it relates to. That way, if they choose at some point in time down the road to take advantage of the way it's currently written in the SAP, they would have like two forms, like a max form, it applies to these 3 people, a min form, it applies to these 20 people. And all you have to do is just list out the names of the people it applies to, but put one form. Would that work?
I don't have a problem with that. Anyone else want to comment?
Sounds like a great compromise.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay,
Fine with that.
so we'll add at the bottom of that form, attach list of employees. Okay, thank you, Jason. And I know we've been looking at these documents for many months now. So would people be amenable to voting on adoption of the policy with the 2 attachments and with attachment 2 amended to read at the bottom, attached list of employees?
So moved.
Second.
Vanessa, did you want to?
I just had a question, not voting. On number 4, on the paragraph 4 on the document, when Mark and I were reviewing this, we wanted to see if the board would be comfortable with inserting some type of deadline in there. So mostly for the payroll department, so Kristen can get all the new pay rates into the system well before July 1st, so we can hopefully avoid having to do any retroactive pay after the 1st of July. Normally, the last few years since we've shifted to this July 1 review date, it's been a little bit hectic on the payroll side. So we would like to ask the board if you would consider putting in a deadline in the document.
Do you have a suggestion as to when that deadline should be?
I think what Brian, I gotta ask Brian to comment here, but I think we were comfortable with June 1st. Was that agreeable, Brian?
Yeah, June 1st would be very within that doable window, so.
No objections to that.
No, I think it makes sense. I'm just trying to look on where in the form we would put that.
So when Mark and I were reviewing the language, we were thinking at the end of the paragraph 4, if we could just say something to the effect of the certification should be submitted to the personnel board by June 1st. So salary adjustments can be made in a timely manner and do not require retroactive pay to be processed.
Do we need to say all that, or could we just say all managers must request salary increases for their employees from the personnel board by submitting the required certification by no later than June 1st?
That would be fine.
On or no later than June 1st.
On or before June 1st.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Barry, do you want me to withdraw my motion and make a new one, or just let the comments indicate the board's approval of that change?
Why don't you make a new motion just so.
All right, so I'm going to withdraw my motion, and I will make a new motion that we accept the draft policy for salary increases under section 7A of the personnel bylaw with the amendment suggested by Ms. Hale related to a deadline date.
Is
Second,
there a second? Okay, we have to do a roll call vote. Mr. Zinsky,
yes.
Mr. Nixon,
Yes.
Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
and the chair votes in the affirmative. So it is unanimously adopted. Thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda was Section 11 benefits review, and this is really just to see where we are, what needs to be done. I know, Jason, you would generously volunteer to sort of take the lead on this. Any status update or anything to tell us?
I've started to comb through the documents. I guess I have two questions for the board and or our town representatives here. I guess one, Dorian, this came up in the last meeting after you dropped, and Betsy alluded to the fact that you had kind of been her +1 on this to start to look at the data. I just wanted to make sure, A, was anything done on it, and B, is there anything you want to do on this other than obviously vet it as a member of the board? This was the holiday, vacation, accrual, payout sort of items under section 11.
Yeah, we were still accumulating information from the different towns, and it was all being sent through Vanessa. And we have a OneDrive right now, right, but Vanessa, with everything that we've received to date. Nothing else has been done with it, Jason. That's as
Okay.
far as we've gotten on it.
So
I'm happy to help if you would like me to help. I'm happy to jump on and help with this.
well, I think we need to expedite if we want to do something for a town meeting, right? Because I think we're going to have the language approved by this board by beginning of February at the latest, if it's going to make it into the warrant. Do I have that right, Mark? I see him, he's nodding. So I guess I was, just a personal impression is I was very underwhelmed by prior Labor Council's memo to the board on this topic. I know Betsy had chased him quite a bit on that, and I felt like it was completely off point with the questions she had actually asked him. So what I wanted to see is potentially, if the board was okay, and Mark and Vanessa thought that this was prudent, having a conversation with current Labor Council to understand what four corners what are the parameters we can and cannot operate in based on our current language, so that we could formulate a proposal to bring back to this board next month that says, this is what we looked at, this is what we couldn't look at, and here's why. And then really just let the board vet. Obviously this started from my time on advisory, where we were looking at kind of the financial aspect of the policy. But I think it's obviously all encompassing in figuring out the right way to bring something forward to the board for initial reaction, but also have a venue once we agree in concept for the employees to provide feedback to us as well. So at least, they feel like they have a voice in the process, because I know when you start to peel back the onion on these things, it can potentially seem unfair in some ways, but very fair in other ways. And I think just finding that balanced approach to ensure consistency with all the stuff that's probably in the OneDrive is what I'm looking for, kind of a consensus before I start peeling that onion back with Dorian, it sounds like.
I guess my question would be, is it realistic to think we have enough time to get all of this done and vote on it by the January meeting, given, and you may have spent a fair amount of time already going through the handbooks. I mean, I've done a little bit, but it takes time to pour through them. And obviously there's so many variations in how towns do these different things to try to put in any sort of coherent presentation, so you can sort of try to make it look like apples to apples comparison. It's very difficult. And then, as you say, trying to get employee input or get some response from employees about how they might react to the changes. I'm not against doing it. I'm just concerned that I certainly change of this magnitude, I don't want to feel we rushed to get it done. I mean, if it had to wait another year, it wouldn't be the end of the world. I just want to make sure we do it thoroughly and we do it right. That's all.
I wouldn't have time to get to do anything much before January, Jason, with all of the holidays. We're what, a week and a half from Christmas? And then I'm gone. I'm gone for the next 2 weeks to New Hampshire till New Year's. And then I leave with Larry running a marathon. So, I mean, I can't do anything until like January 11th. I'm not available. So I could not get any work done. I mean, I could take work with me and do it when I'm in New Hampshire, but I can't really do too much until, I would say February would be a better time to get stuff done, but not January.
The problem is we need the language in the warrant for February. So Barry, I think it's a good question, right? What I want to understand is what the four corners are, what we can operate in, because I think I said at the last meeting. So like, I think there's a very favorable change. We keep approving these 3-week start, 3-week vacations because we're finding people with experience. Like that's a favorable change, right? Right. And it will probably bump people up with 2 weeks of vacation right now to 3. I find it very hard to believe there's gonna be any employee that would argue with that. Right. And it's just acknowledging the current labor market. Let's see if what we can and can't do. So I'm willing to do some legwork between now and the next meeting. I don't think anyone should feel inclined that we have to bring it forward, but I don't think we can keep punting this issue down the road. It's too big of an issue. And I think we all acknowledge that any change is going to have some sort of clawback period to it, right? In terms of if we are going to limit the amount that people can carry, if that is where we land, you're going to have to give people time to use it, right? So I think the clock starts ticking once town meeting takes action. So I'm willing to do some legwork, but I would never ask anyone to rush something like this. But we may find that there's only 2 things we can do, and we may feel comfortable with those 2 things. What those 2 things are, I think is my question mark for today.
Yeah, I just think that Labor Council should probably opine on this first as to, before we get into this any deeper than what we are. I think we need to find out from new Labor Council what we can and can't do.
So that's what I want to do between now and the next meeting,
Right.
Dorian, is I guess what I'm
That's
recommending.
fine. I thought you wanted to get the whole thing done by January.
I think let's just say Labor Council says you can look at item A and item B, but everything else just really don't go there.
Okay.
Then it may be looking at what other towns have. Like I've already done a lot of the work when I was on advisory, because I looked at other towns to bring the thing forward in the first place to say, you may want to look at this. So let's just see what's in bounds and then chart a timeline from there would be my suggestion. And then just get everyone's appetite. And if we're not ready, we're not ready, but I think we need to at least understand what the bounds are that we can work within.
All right, well, I'll do as much as I can to help you out with where my time limits are. I'm happy to step up to the plate and give you a hand. With this discussion, with going through the minutes, and this may be not the right time to bring this up, the discussion took place around an employee handbook.
Yeah, and
And
I
Vanessa was going to update the board at this meeting on that. Do we have any more information on progress on putting together a handbook, or are we still
Yes.
gonna?
When we were talking with Attorney Fedorov about, the review of hiring policies and so forth, I did have a conversation with her about the employee handbook as well, as opposed to prior town council. Attorney Fedorov sees no issue with doing an employee handbook. In fact, she was going to a town meeting that very week to have one approved that she had authored for another municipal client. So I think that is something that is something she would be very willing to work with the board on. I also wanted to just throw out a suggestion, since she is a brand new labor attorney, if the board would like me to invite her to one of your upcoming meetings, I think that would also be a very fruitful discussion.
I think that's a great idea.
yeah, and two things. One is on Jason's point, why don't we just see where we are in January? If we have everything we need, then we can vote. If not, obviously we can push it off. And I appreciate, Jason, you doing all of this work. And maybe it would make sense, Vanessa and Mark, if you could set up a Zoom call for Jason and I with Attorney Fedorov, so we can answer Jason's questions and go over anything else. I don't know if anyone else, I didn't mean to exclude Dorianne or David if you want to participate, but
Okay.
at a minimum. So if that makes sense, that we'll prepare for January, see where we are, and if we don't think we have everything we need, then we'll simply push it off till a later date. On the handbook point, and I'm glad you raised it, Dorianne, because I was going to, can we have, because this seems to have been continually kicked down the road, can we sort of have a goal of when we might have something? I don't care whether it's 6 months or, just so we know when to revisit this and say, either we have something to review or when will we have something to review? So is there some date we can sort of look at?
Sure. Today I will ask her to send me, so we get an idea of how she's formatted them in the past, one of the recent examples that she just finished working on. And then I think we'd be able to tell, well, how much work would that be, on our end? And then set, certainly, at your next meeting, have a timeline update for you. I just don't know how extensive the board is looking for. Are you looking for something that, mirrors the SAP, or are you looking for a sort of a volume of all of our policies in one place? I guess I need a little guidance on what kind of format you were envisioning.
Well, just my own opinion, it would encompass both.
Yeah.
It would cover all of the policies that apply to employees. So there, obviously a lot of that is in the SAP, but you have other policies as well. There's things on benefits that may not be in the SAP that you'd want to provide to employees. It's a Bible for employees. So if they have a question about something, that's the first place they look is the handbook, and that should give them most of the answers. So that's my own view. Others may want to speak on that as well.
I think it should just be one handbook, including the SAP and all of their benefits and all of their rights as an employee, what they can and can't do, the rules, everything. I think it should all be in one thing. You can start off with the SAP and then include everything beyond that. But they should have something that they can go home and look at if they have a question and find an answer.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Did I hear, Vanessa, you say this, that Attorney Fedorov was going to a town meeting for them to actually adopt the handbook?
I think in that particular community, it may have been part of their bylaw.
Okay.
So it was.
That is
done.
not the anticipated result here, though, right?
No.
Okay. Okay, just checking.
We're trying to
All
go
right.
the opposite direction.
Okay.
And be able to change things more as the need arises.
Phew. Okay, thank you.
All right, anything else on the whole benefits review
No.
issue? Seeing nothing, we will move on to the new position guidance document. Again, this is something we've seen in different forms for several months now. And I know that Vanessa has some thoughts on revisions to the document, but before I turn it to her, anyone on the board have any changes, questions, issues with the draft that was in the package?
Well, in the top, it says, we're happy to assist you with the JD. I think we should spell out job description. Even though I'm sure they know what it is, I think that should be spelled out. On the first thing under job description. Or just take that out. Just take that whole line out.
Okay, and you must be looking at, and maybe I'm looking at a different draft.
I'm looking at Bates, hold on.
Okay.
May
I may have just printed out a different one.
I'm
that's
at
all.
Bates 23. I'm assuming I'm in the right area.
I see what you're talking about. It says revision 4 on the top right, and it's in italics under 1 job description.
Yes, I don't think we need that last sentence.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I do have it. I just wasn't seeing it. Yeah, we can take that out. I agree. Anything else from board members? Okay, seeing none, I will turn it over to Vanessa. I know you have several.
Or some of the corrections that Mark and I, not corrections, proposed revisions that Mark and I thought of when we reviewed this was, instead of names in particular, in policy, we generally go with the position title. So just replacing assistant town administrator with my own name. At some point, someone else will be in this position. So just so we don't have to go back and revise things like that on a regular basis. Our primary change, I did have one change in that second sentence, but if the board is taking it out, it's immaterial. The primary change was in paragraph C under external comps. We just wanted to make note of the fact that when people are talking to other communities, when they're doing this kind of research, we want our employees, primarily would be a department head, I would assume, to really ask the question that, well, what is the person responsible for, in your community when we're looking at making a change? Specifically, just for example, an assistant town administrator in another community might also be the economic development agent, as opposed to the HR director, or, what's common in other departments of public works is whether or not they're responsible for grounds or cemetery. So when people are looking at figuring out, what is a true comp and basing the salary range on that, we just want them to make sure they're asking those questions to make sure they found a position that is as close to apples and apples as possible. So I think it goes beyond just asking what the pay rates are and getting in a little bit more detail on the actual role.
Okay.
Would it make sense for that feedback, Vanessa, to actually get a copy of the job description that the comp that's being used is tied to? Just because verbal can.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think that is really, excellent advice, because that's the record that, is going to prove, yes or no, that this is really a comparable position. I get requests multiple times a week for job descriptions. So that's something that in other communities, people have at the ready. If it, in some cases it's on their website, it's very readily available information. In addition to asking for the job description, one thing that I've done in some cases in the past when I've been helping other departments do this research is, set up an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, these are all the categories of information that we want to fill in. And then that makes the information coming back to the personnel board, as consistent as possible.
I have a question, and this grows from years of experience and skepticism. We are basically, and maybe this is what we have to do, trusting the manager to who wants to have as high a compensation as possible, I would expect, because they want to get the best person they can get. to go out and collect this information, and then present it to us. And I don't say this in any way to suggest any of our managers would do it in anything other than the most ethical way possible. But in the real world, in the world that I've lived in, you would have a manager who would just get all the information that supports what they want to do and not include someone who happens to be paid lower. They might, dare I say, cherry pick the data that they collect. Now, this is not something that comes up a lot, I would think. I mean, I've been on the board 3 years. This has come up once, maybe, just the IT position. I don't recall any others, maybe there are.
I don't either.
Would it make more sense without putting too much additional work on anybody to have one person, I guess Vanessa, be the one who collects the information rather than having the person who stands to benefit from it collect the information? Again, this may just be me being overly cynical, but I've just seen it too many times where someone who has a vested interest is collecting data that's supposed to be neutral, but they put their thumb on the scale, if you will, when they're collecting the data. I don't know how others feel about that.
Yeah, I think that levels the playing field. And I completely agree with that approach. And just to throw Ms. Hale a lifeline, something like that, can be conducted by other staff in our office. I'd rather have her doing other things. So, but I do think that does level the playing field. I mean, look, if I tell a department head to go out and get 3 bids for something that you need for a product or a service, and they've got somebody they like to use, I'm going to get the bid from the person they like to use and 2 others that they went and got and made sure they're lower or higher. Sorry, higher. Right. So I understand that, that there are ways to get where you need to be, all while following the rules. So I think the suggestion is a good one.
I agree.
I agree.
I'm just going to add, I'm not going to distract from that comment because I agree with it, especially from a private sector perspective. I will say there still is some benefit, depending upon the position that we're looking at, by having the department head involved. Again, it depends on the position. Because I do think that they may ask questions. Again, they know there's going to be oversight from someone in Mr. Purple's team, right? I think we've all agreed on that. But I do think, I just went through the same process in my public sector role. It was for a position that was related to people that would report to me. What we found is by documenting the 21 comparable communities that, in that instance, GovHR had decided for my community, if we didn't ask the right questions, we wouldn't come back with the right data for the problem that that personnel board was trying to resolve. So I do think that there are really important questions that a department head may ask on the role that, in all fairness to Mr. Purple's team, they may not have visibility to. So I would say, depending upon the magnitude of the change, I used the IT position that was recently done, major change, right? New position, never had it before, clearly could have multiple different scope or roles. There'd be some discretion that Mr. Purple and his team use of whether to pull the department head in, or candidly, at least the 4 of us, one of the 4 of us sitting here, just to listen in, to just hear some of the discussions, especially for the major communities that we find are the true comps, right? Because we're going to find in our landscape of 21, as Vanessa outlined, the assistant town administrator, maybe the EDC coordinator or something else in another community. They may have 10 other roles in another community that we don't have. I just think comps are very difficult in general in the public sector is what I've found, because every town does it differently because of the stress on budget. So I would just say, while I fully support some sort of independent review here, I would caution that there still should be some level of involvement from a department head if it's a very specialized role.
I think that's fair, and maybe the way we word it, and I think we'll have to go through another revision, but maybe we say something like the department head in coordination with the personnel director, something along those lines. So it's clear when it comes before us, we have the personnel director saying, yes, I agree with this, but you also have the department manager saying yes. So they're both on board with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does make sense. My only response back to Mr. Malinowski would be that under my assumption, and Ms. Hale can correct me if I'm way off base, is that we're not going to go out and try to seek external comps until we at least have a draft of the job description and we understand what they're looking for. You know, this IT position is a classic example. You know, a senior, IT technician means a whole bunch of different things to a whole bunch of different people than what we think it means to us. So if we've got certain responsibilities as delineated in the job description, we know when we're calling these communities that what we call one thing, they actually have it under a different term. So I think having those guidelines, and the department head is going to be integral in putting, this job description together. We'll have that information to go with, but again, it's a collaborative process. If there's a way that this board feels comfortable in kind of outlining that or putting, checks and balances in there, I'm fine with that too.
Okay, unless anybody has an objection, I will take a shot at revising that paragraph to incorporate sort of this discussion to reflect that it's a collaborative process between the department head and the personnel director. And we can have language we can look at in January.
The one other suggestion I would make in this document, I have no problem having Vanessa's name in the document. I'd like to think she'll be here forever and we don't have to think about ever changing the document. However, I'm always big about, instead of putting names in, putting titles. So you may want to put in assistant town administrator, or if you want to put personnel director or designee, can always do that too. But rather than simply putting someone's name, it's better to keep it as titles.
I agree with that.
You could do it as an and or.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else on this policy before we move on?
So you're going to
I would just-
redraft it and get it back to us for next meeting, Barry?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Barry, the only minor thing I just add is if we can put an emphasis on A in the approval of job description, like I think Mark's point is really valid. Like until we've all agreed, both the governing body and personnel board have agreed on the job description, it's probably premature to do B and C. Let's figure out what role we're trying to solve for in the community, and then, not let the numbers distract us too much. I know it's crazy to think coming from me, but I think solid job description is the first key.
Okay. I'll put that in.
And just one, I'm sorry, and just one more thing to be convoluted, just to complete the whole circle. Would there be some consideration maybe about putting C before B? So once you have the new job description, you put it through the JAQ, you do all the grading and you say it should be a grade 6. And then, and you've come out and you've said that that's where the grading comes out, but then you do the comps and salaries don't match up. You need to then revisit. It might be better to have that information, before you do the scoring and grading, because I think that is something that is taken into account before you actually look to assign a slot for it.
After
But-
just living through that, I would agree, Mark.
But
I think it's a
then
good,
don't you have the salary driving, the salary information driving how the questionnaire is completed? In other words, you're building in a bias. If, let's say, and I know this was sort of the situation that came up, you have the salary shows the person should make $40 an hour, but the JQ shows in the job range that only goes up to $35 an hour. What do we do? What do we do then?
Well, I think I don't disagree with you about the bias. I think you either get the bias before or you get the bias after. Right? So you say it's a grade 6, the comparables for positions that match what we're doing, in the real world say that they don't match, the salary of our grade 6. So there's got to be there's consideration at some point. Your point is as valid as I think what I'm trying to point out. So you very well could leave it alone. I just think you need both pieces in order to make your decision. So and so I guess the order is less important.
I just think
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
easier.
I'm just uncomfortable, and we're going to get to the salary tables in a minute, but the salary tables are there to make sure that we're treating everybody equitably, or at least that's part of the reason. And I'm a little uncomfortable in saying we're sort of going to adjust. Anyway, you get my point.
Yeah.
So I won't belabor that. All right, so I'll come back with something for the next meeting. And this segues very well into a discussion about salary tables, which we started at the last meeting. And I think there's an agreement by everyone that we need to adjust them. The question is, I guess there's a short-term question and a long-term question, but we obviously need to do something by our next meeting in order to get them revised at town meeting. But there's the larger question of doing a new sort of evaluation of the tables. It's now been 4 years since we did the last one. And if we're going to do that, what's the process we're going to use to do that? As we discussed, I don't think we necessarily have money in the budget to do the full-blown GovHR analysis that was done 4 years ago. So if we're not going to do that, what is the process we're going to use to revise the schedules? But also the more immediate question is, what are we going to do for the schedules for fiscal year 22-23? So it's sort of two questions I'll throw out there for people's thoughts. Maybe it's one question. I don't know. It just seems to me that we're not going to be able to do a full-blown analysis of the tables, of the schedules in time for next month's meeting. Thoughts?
I think that's going to take a lot of time to get that done. And when was the last one done? What, 17, 18? We actually started utilizing it in 18, and it's supposed to be done every
4 years.
every 4 years. So we're looking at 22. So I think we have another year to make those adjustments for the SAP. Correct? So I think
Right,
the salary ranges are, I think where they are right now, Barry, is going to be fine for the coming year. I think we have to look, I think we're looking at getting those adjustments made during this year for next year.
And maybe no one knows the answer off the top of their head. With the annual adjustment that we approved, if we don't do anything with the tables, will anyone be hitting the maxes? Do you know?
Brian question. Brian,
Oh, I don't know. I know there wasn't too many people right near the edge, so if there is, I would guess it's one or two.
Okay, but I know it has happened in the past where people being paid above the maximum for their job grade. I mean, that shouldn't happen. That's the whole purpose, but I'm not going to get into that. But I think we need to avoid that if we can. So is there a reason why we wouldn't increase the salary schedules at least in the same amount that we voted to increase the annual increase? If what I said made any sense.
you mean increase the high end by 3%?
Right. Is there any downside to doing that? Obviously, there is an impact then on, I guess, new hires. And that
So
could
would that include shifting the minimum as well?
well, if we're going to do 3%, then we would move the minimum.
So we would shift the whole grid by 3%.
I mean, that's the way we've done it in the
Yeah.
past.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that would also mean, shifting we would increase the minimum.
So
ranges.
is there anybody that we hired in the last year who then would find themselves below a new hire, but they wouldn't because they're going to get the 3%?
They'll get the
annual
3% adjustment based on a positive evaluation, of course. There is, I can think of one employee who is being paid outside of the max. But, Brian and I can run that report with Christian pretty quickly and see, is there anyone else that might be very close to the maximum? But it's a very small group of people, if at all, more than one.
Anyone else have thoughts?
So, my thought is we obviously can't do something for January or February to do a comprehensive review, but we should obviously start a timeline and agree to a timeline for that. I'm not opposed to doing a across the board 3% on both the full-time and part-time tables. I candidly would like to vote on it in January because I think I would like to hear, unless Mark or Brian are here today, ready today, any adverse financial impact of doing that. Because we kind of we went from 2.8 to 3 in the last meeting. I know it created a heck of a lot of admin for a lot of departments for a 0.2% increase. I just want to make sure if we're going to do something like that's what we're doing, and that I know we're not going to have the collective bargaining numbers in front of us until probably right before town meeting, but that's a guide I wish I had, just to kind of make sure that, again, there's a level playing field as well. But I think our only path forward is going to be to recommend a percentage increase across the board to the tables. Whether that should be the same 3% or another number is, I'm not ready yet. I don't know what's going to take me to get ready more than just needing to put something in a warrant.
Well, and that's fine. And it would be helpful to know about employees who are close to the max now and how they might be impacted, and we may not need to raise it 3%, to get through the year. We just want to make sure that nobody finds themselves hitting the max because they're getting a 3% increase and the table hasn't moved. Now, you may not need to move it 3%. That you probably wouldn't have to if they're not at the max already, but there may be people who are at the max already.
No, but
Right.
I'd like to know the financial impact to the town as well. So I think that was a really good question.
Yeah, that's reasonable. So why don't we put that question off until January?
Okay.
But then let's talk about if we're not using an outside consultant to do a salary study, how are we going to do this?
You want, so you're trying to look at regrading the job descriptions? So doing a JA2
Well-
on everything, and like we can do that in-house, can't we? It's a lot of work, but I mean, that can be done in-house.
Well, I mean, the question is, and what the salary consultant does, obviously, is look at what are the going rates for these types of jobs in the market. And there's a lot of work involved in, for the very reasons we just talked about. You can't just call up Wayland and say, okay, what are you paying for these positions? Because the positions may not be exactly the same as the positions that we have. So you have to look at, delve more deeply than that. So, I mean, there's a lot involved in doing these in a way that, gets you information that's reasonable and that you can fairly make these judgments based on. So I mean, are we comfortable taking this task on and doing it ourselves, recognizing we can't just go to Mark and Vanessa and say, okay, you do it, because they've got enough to do already. Or is it that some subset of this board working with Mark and Vanessa can do it? I'm saying these things not because I have an answer, because I don't. I'm looking for input on what people think is the way to go ahead.
Wouldn't it be the same process, Vanessa, as we just did for the new job description for the IT tech, that we just did that whole process where
Yeah, I think a lot of it, would be very similar, collecting the data on, the min and max of positions, that is something, we can do ourselves. I think the more time consuming process is, getting all the job descriptions, analyzing, okay, is that, assistant town clerk responsible for the same things that Amy Berry is here, for example? That kind of analysis, I think is the more time consuming part, which, could, although we're very capable of doing that ourselves, it's just a matter of time. And, I'll certainly defer to Mark on what he thinks we can manage internally ourselves. But as far as gathering the numbers, we can certainly do that in a fairly, quick turnaround.
Well, the GovHR, their last cost was like $20,000 for them to do the whole thing, and that was just Schedule A.
Right. So that
was
did
just one
include,
schedule.
many employee interviews, reviewing all the information that our employees filled out in the job analysis questionnaire. We also came up with a whole new classification of positions at that time and sort of regraded, okay, who's in a supervisory, who's in a mid-level, that kind of analysis as well. So she did a number of things that I think is, well beyond just collecting the data and looking at the job descriptions.
Right, then it's also reviewing all the job descriptions, making sure
Correct.
they're up to date.
Yeah, I will say, I think Mark and Brian would agree, I hope, that I think our job descriptions are in very good shape. Every time we have someone depart and we're recruiting again, for that job, we take a look at the job description. So I don't think there's a great deal of work to be done on the job descriptions themselves.
No, but it's just part of it. They would have to be reviewed and make
Exactly.
sure they're all in line and that's done.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it's a lot of work, but. I
Mark,
think-
did I leave
I think
out
we can
anything?
get it done
that-
in-house instead of
wanted to
spending,
add?
I'm sure the $20,000 price tag has gone up. So it's probably closer to 30, maybe in between there somewhere, but we don't have that in our budget. But we
Yeah,
have another year before we have to get it done, correct, Mark? I mean, do we
Yeah, I
have
mean,
to?
the whole thing is timeliness. If this is something we want fairly quickly, it's something we probably have to contract for assistance. If it's something that we're willing to stretch out a little bit, then it's something that we probably can slot in to do in-house. I think one of the things to consider, and I will only say this once, because I've said this over the past several years, I get no traction, but I will say this again, is that, and I've heard it today, in some of the discussions, is that we talk about trying to get things done with the specter of getting them done in time for town meeting. And one of the, these issues are the same in other communities as well. Everyone's got a personnel bylaw, but most communities, and this community as well, our personnel bylaw, this board has the ability to promulgate its own rules and regulations. So something the personnel board may want to start thinking about is whether there are certain parts of the bylaw that you would feel more comfortable promulgating as rules and regulations so that we can address issues as they come up during the year, because personnel is not static. It does change fairly constantly, little tweaks here, little tweaks there, things that come up. And if you have to wait 12 months to react to something, it doesn't make us very effective. And so I put that out there just for consideration. There may be some parts of the bylaw that should be left in the bylaw. And then there are some things that may make sense for this board to promulgate as rules and regulations that you currently have the ability to do, so that you can be more responsive and reactive to some of these things when they change, in June or July after you just get out of town meeting. We don't have to wait 10 months or hope for a special town meeting, that we can correct them sooner.
Yeah, and I agree with the general point there, and it certainly became a major issue with the IT position. I mean, we lucked out in a sense with the special town meeting, but if we hadn't had that, I think we have to find a way to solve that problem, particularly because we just can't wait that period of time. Here, I think in terms of the timing of this, I think we have time. We're not going to get this analysis done in time for this year's town meeting.
I think it's for the
So-
following year.
Yeah, I think it's for the following year. So we have roughly a year to get this done. So it's a matter of who's got the time and energy and willingness to help get it done. So if we're comfortable, Mark, Vanessa, if you're comfortable, you can play a major role in this. I think I would certainly be willing to chip in. I suspect there are others on the committee, on the board, who would be willing to help out as well. I think if we say this is something we want done by next December, and that's the goal, I think we can do it.
Yep, I agree, because we have a year and a half to get it. Well, not quite a year and a half, but we have at least a full year to get it done, and I'm happy to step up. There's
I'm
plenty of time
curious
to
if
get it done.
if the board would be interested in bringing on, a grad school intern to assist in something like this. We haven't had a strong internship program here. It's something Mark and I talk about, at least once a year or so. But if that is something you would be interested in, we could certainly investigate that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be open to that. Anyone else have thoughts on this, Jason?
I'd certainly be open to that. And to go back to Mark's point, Mark, if you do have specific areas where you think you've seen better handled by policy. I'd love to have you come and make a presentation of those certain sections to in our next meeting, right? Like we'll put an agenda item on. Because if you think there's some quick hits that we may agree to, I'd love to hear what your recommendations are. We may not be able to act that quickly, but maybe just a few tweaks to certain language that we could enact to give the flexibility that may need to exist throughout the year.
And I would suggest that, Ms. Hale's already setting up a call with the chair and with you, Mr. Malinowski. I think that it might not be bad to broach that subject and kind of get her thoughts on, doing something like that and how a transition would work. I'm happy to, like I said, if the board is interested in looking, at doing that, how do we begin? How do we start, how would we start that process effectively? I mean, most of the time when you bring these changes and these personnel board changes to the bylaw to town meeting, it's Greek. And if you haven't spent the time that this board spends with it, it's going to be Greek. So getting to town meeting or looking at the warrant and looking through and seeing what you highlighted, it's very hard to get context. It's very hard to make a decision whether it's right, wrong, or you're indifferent, before a vote is taken. And so, but again, I would ask that if you're having the conversation with Labor Council, you can begin to broach that subject and see where they're at. I've broached it very quickly with Labor Council, but I think it'd be better for the board to do that in that conversation, at least, get her thoughts before we go forward with some areas that I think would be beneficial, but I'm happy to offer those.
Okay, thanks. And we have to be mindful of the fact that Betsy will be in the audience at town meeting, so she will read and question. So, okay. We don't have to do it at this meeting again. Dorian and I think have volunteered to help out on this whole salary thing, salary schedule changes. So let's figure out how we're going to move forward on that. Unless there's anything else, any other business come before the board?
We just need another body.
I will speak to Mr. Semino. We have a meeting for January. Do you want to schedule February?
Wait, when do we have January scheduled?
The 12th.
Okay. Can we
right,
move the meetings to the morning, back to the morning at 8 a.m. instead of this noon thing in the middle of the day?
I'm not a morning person, so I could do 9, but what are people? I mean, I have a more open schedule than most everyone, so I defer to Jason. You still work? Is
12 is tough.
Okay.
Not opposed to it when we need to do it, but I would gravitate more towards where Dorian was going. 9 and 8 are a lot better than 12.
12 it's the whole day shot.
Yeah, that's fine. Dave?
9 o'clock works good for me.
All right. I'm amenable. Do you want to move the January meeting to 9? Is that Dorian?
Yeah, that's work. I didn't have the January date. I just wanted to make sure I have it.
That's right. You were.
Oh, and I'll be here.
Okay,
All right,
so
February.
January 12th will be at 9 a.m. And February the 9th,
Okay.
does that work?
Yep.
I'm
At
gonna
9.
I'm actually gonna be away till the next week.
Okay, you want to do the 16th?
For me.
Fine with me.
Dorian?
Oh, no, I have a haircut scheduled. I'll change that. Yeah, that's fine. I'll change my haircut for you guys.
Okay,
I'm
what a
the,
trooper.
Vanessa and I are low men on the totem pole. You want to
Okay,
do March while you're here?
sure. The 9th again,
The 9th sounds good.
does that work for everyone?
Perfect.
And all of these are at 9 o'clock in the morning.
9 o'clock?
Thank you. Well, you're out by maybe 11. You're not, I know, it just messes up the whole day when you've been meeting in the middle of the day. Can't go anywhere in the morning, can't go anywhere in the afternoon.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Okay, so we've got those 3 meetings. I think we're done. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Second,
All in favor, Ms. Jazinski,
I,
Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
and the chair votes in the affirmative. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
thanks
Have a-
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.